When you can get yourself to see that the consequences are emotional, you're able to draw a much more clear picture of the actual trajectory of your decisions. And I think fear starts to subside and the choice becomes quite obvious, right? We very often know what we want to do. It's our fear that prevents us from being able to see clearly.
I just gone and grabbed a drink a minute ago and I headed back out because our view is just amazing. So I got to stop and take the view in where we are. And the little deer and the mama deers were out there and the baby deer playing around in the field eating the grass. We've got enough water lately to make everything super green where we are.
Best.
The best. So Britt, where are you located at?
I live in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Salt Lake City, Utah. Oh, I'm familiar with that. We used to have a warehouse there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Salt Lake City.
Moved here about 2 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. Why Salt Lake City?
The mountains. Man, these mountains. Oh. Yeah. We came here to visit. And about a couple days in, I was like, are we going to live here? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, all right, we're in.
Oh, that's cool. I love it that you can just get up and go. We had that experience a while back. It was Park City. So I had gone to Salt Lake City on a business, and we had as I mentioned, we had a warehouse there and employees and stuff, and we ended up on a weekend up in Park City, which we had driven past a number of times because from Oregon to Missouri, that's one of the ways you could take. And as a kid, we used to take that trip all the time back and forth.
Yeah.
And I always remember going through there, and there's Park City, but I never actually stopped, gone in, seen it. And when we did, we went downtown and experienced it. I was like, man, I could as a guy who grew up in Oregon, I'm like, I could move here. This is really cool.
Yeah, it's special. It's a really special place to just be that close to the mountains.
So what is it you do that allowed you to just say, hey, we're moving to Utah and we're setting up shop and that's that?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So I started my business a few years ago and I'm a personal and professional development coach. So all the stuff mindset, right? What are our internal barriers getting in the way of us breaking through the glass ceilings, right? Where are the places where procrastination is a latent fear of failure? Where are the places where the not deserving, the fear of imposter syndrome, where are those getting in your way? Because you know how to run your business, right? In my perspective, it's when you can't listen to your own internal brilliance, that's when we have a problem.
Interesting. So you're already in my head. Wow, which is cool. It's a great way to start this off.
Okay, let's go.
Get in my head, girl. Let's go. So there's a lot to unpack there. Which of those areas you think is most, it's transformational change is kind of what you're talking about, right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, it is. And, for me, I really think of the things we're not taught, right? We go to school, you learn the 21st president of the United States, you learn a physics equation, right? You learn how to take some tests, and no one tells you how your brain develops. No one tells you how to effectively communicate. No one tells you how to manage your stress or your emotions or where they come from. And so really understanding from a neuroscientific perspective, why do our beliefs develop the way that they do? And how come change feels so hard? And I think the most interesting place for me to start is understanding our relationship to change, because we read the books, we, do the things. If I know the answers, why don't I change? And what I really look at is it's a different part of your brain, right? Your logical prefrontal cortex, which books really say hi to, is only 5% of your brain power. So Neil, if I were to do a functional MRI scan of you making decisions, trying to run your business, 95% of the brain activity is in your amygdala. Your amygdala is your emotional brain, and that's where your limiting beliefs live. And so trying to think your way out of your beliefs really doesn't work very well. And so when people say, why am I unable to take good advice? That's where I fit in. That's where I really feel like I shine, is why don't we take good advice? Because our beliefs are in the way.
Why am I unable to take good advice? Well, I can almost answer that question for myself a little bit. And it's mostly in thinking about, as you're talking, where is my most difficult changes come from? Where have I been willing to change the most? And it's usually the worst things that could happen. Like I'm at the bottom of a precipice of change, a major life event. And I'm like, okay, I guess I have to change. I'm one of those really super stubborn people. Is there a way to avoid change in that most negative context? Like, how do we turn it into a positive?
Right. So, I think that's such a beautiful question. And the way that I think about it is, I think we sometimes conflate change in our lives with changes in our thinking. And changes in our life can put us in a situation where we feel at times powerless, like I have to do something. And I think that there can be a bit of heaviness around that. And the way that I think about change is, what if you start thinking about what's possible from the get-go, right? What if you start looking at, again, I talk about breaking through glass ceilings, but all I really mean by that is, what if you think differently about what you want and what's possible? And then when you feel blocked, instead of trying to push through, dig a level deeper. What is that block? What is it that I'm actually afraid of, right? What are the belief systems, or I call them, it's like you think of like the old cassette tapes, right? It's like there's a tape, it's playing on repeat. It's like one sentence, right? It's like
going to 8-track machine. We're going to cassette tape land.
Yeah, right. I know. You think I'm like 106, but
no, that was referring to me. And again, I think you used your analogy for me, because otherwise you would have said DVDs or something, and I would have
No, sorry, I got it. So
we're going to the well, at least you didn't say 8-track, so that's cool.
Right, exactly. So you think of like, what are the tapes that play on repeat, right? Is it the, other people are, smarter than me, or if I don't know the answers, people will think I'm not credible, or if I put myself out there, I'll be rejected, right? What are those tapes? And there's typically a couple of them, and they play the loudest and they play on repeat. And it's hard to think because you've got all these different voices in your head. And so when you think about change, I think instead of thinking just about the external changes of the something's got to give, right? What are some of the belief systems or some of the tapes or some of the voices in our head that we'd like to shift? And instead of fighting them, what if you started to listen and started to say, okay, so these are the primary tapes, and then you start looking at how to work through them? Because I think that's where our power is. Our power isn't in fighting. It's in understanding and then starting to rewire those programs.
So how did change come to you to get to where you are now? What affected you?
Yeah, so mine is a two-part story. And the first one, I grew up in a very unique environment. My dad created a process to help people shift limiting beliefs. So I grew up with this stuff at 4 years old. I was already talking about beliefs. By the time I was 9, I was sitting in workshops, helping out. And by the time I was 14, if there were people, who couldn't afford, to work with my parents, they said, well, I don't know if you want to work with a teenager, but she works in the background of the company and runs trainings. And so I started taking on kind of, pro bono clients as a teenager. So I've been, doing this work literally my entire life. And where the shift really came for me is my dad and I were thought partners, and, we just had such similar minds, but my dad was a lot more cerebral and I was a lot more focused on the human aspect, people's experience. And so my dad and I, he would be developing a process and I would say, but what about this or what about that? And I just was so committed to his work. But the curveball, it didn't work for me. It worked for everybody. And I mean, he had hundreds and thousands of people who did his work, and I was the only person it didn't work for. And I think a big part of that was because I was introduced to it at such a young age. I think my brain kind of developed around it. And
conditioned to that environment, right?
Right, exactly. And so I fell in love with his work, but from a personal perspective, I was really blocked. And my dad passed away a few years ago. And the question for me was really, how can I honor my dad and his legacy? And I always thought honoring my dad was getting his work into the world. And what I realized is my dad didn't really care about his name. My dad cared about evolution. And so the answer was so obvious. It was evolve his work and evolve it so that it could work for me. And so the last probably 6 years of my life have really been developing his work in a way that I could really grow and shift. And so that's been my trajectory. And it's been really beautiful because I really have been able to kind of put my stamp. And, when I work with clients, I'm able to see, okay, well, this is, honoring him, but it's my voice, and it's really kind of turned into my work. So that's been my journey.
Well, that's a unique life of legacy and instilling the values of those into you,
right,
which have given you purpose. You've taken over a different level of purpose than he got, which is such a beautiful and very cool thing to hear.
Yeah.
As a dad who has, 4 daughters and lives in an environment of all ladies.
Yeah.
I can understand the difference between the emotional and cerebral differences between his thought processes and yours.
Right.
How did you come to reconcile that as you've gotten a little bit older?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a very intellectually driven person. I love learning. I love thinking. I love kind of the cerebral part of the human experience. I think what I realized though is that there is a heart piece missing, because people need to feel safe and people want to feel held and people want to feel supported. And I think bringing a very unconditional heart piece to the puzzle is also really healing for people. People come in and they're going to talk to you about some personal stuff. They want to know that they're held and supported. I think coming in with the confidence to say, I've been doing this my whole life. I've got you. There's nothing you're going to bring to the table that I don't have, right? This is how my brain works. I already have a roadmap for somebody before they even sit down. It's just, I've been literally doing this since I'm 4. But at the same time, to know, like, I've also got you in a heart way, and I'm going to take really good care of you. And that, I mean, it just like, it makes me jump out of bed in the morning to know that I can give
As I would refer to it, you brought the feminine persuasion, as some of my girls can be to dad. Which just happened yesterday, as I was told that they had found, rescued, whatever, a new kitty. Daddy, it's outside the clinic and it doesn't have a home and no one's going to feed it because nobody's there. And all of a sudden this new kitty shows up and they're handing it to me going, Dad, don't you love it? And the analytical cerebral side of me, it is, I got to feed one more outside cat. Well, it's going to stay outside, Daddy. I'm like, no, it better not come in this house.
You're like, that's an outdoor cat, guys. That's an outdoor cat.
It is an outdoor cat, and it will stay outdoor. But Daddy, it has to stay in utility room until it's like, dang it.
Yeah.
You bring the feminine persuasion into that, and it changes the perspective of conversation. Puts a little more of that intuitive feeling into it, which I understand.
Right.
That it's very different between the male and female, and between the species. I get it. It's there, whether we like to acknowledge it or not. There's a very big difference. In fact, my mentor used to say one thing. I won't cut you off. Sorry. My mentor used to say, in sales, there's a very big difference between a guy showing up and what he called, and I'm just going to sound really bad, but legs and cookies. Yeah. When legs and cookies show up, and he lost a deal one time, he used to reference all the time. He's like, I'm in, I had the deal, I was ready to close it down, and this new sales rep walks in a skirt with cookies in the office, and all of a sudden I find myself being ejected from the contract.
It's a wild difference in how we respond to men and women.
It's extremely different, right? You call a customer support, you got a problem, you're angry, you meet a man, you feel a different level. I know I do. You see a feminine or a more persuasive voice on the other side that maybe is a little softer. You're like, oh, well, maybe I'm not as upset as I was.
It's interesting. Yeah, I do feel like there's something very beautiful about having kind of a feminine nature about me in my work. I think it's been a lot easier as an entrepreneur. When I worked in tech, it was very frustrating at times being the only woman at every executive table. I found that I definitely had to fight for my voice a bit, but I think it definitely helped me build character. Like I really had to earn my reputation. There was a lot of places where my male counterparts would, kind of goof off, and I would be expected to, I would show up 12 hours a day. And if I had to leave because, for some reason at 6 o'clock, it was like, oh, Britt, I feel like you're really not committed to this project right now. I'm like, but my male counterpart left at 2:30, right? What are you talking about? But it gave me a level of understanding and commitment to my work and to my craft, for sure.
Well, being an entrepreneur clearly levels some aspect of that field. Don't you feel like it does?
It feels really different. It feels really, really different. Yeah. And I feel like now I gain credibility because people have heard of me, or they know who I am, or they have a conversation with me, and the things that I say resonate, and they're like, oh, wow, no one's ever put it that way, right? I've seen 15 coaches, I've done 400 things, no one has ever gotten me in that way. Let's work together. They don't really care my gender. And then I really do get to say, well, being a female and having a heart the size of a small country, I get to love you now. So not only, right, and I get to balance the mind and the heart. And Neil, this is something really interesting that I've thought about very little, but sometimes I do wonder if the things that come out of my mouth, like what percentage heart and brain, like from the intuition and the cerebral perspective, I always come to the same conclusion. And so I do wonder, like, is there a little bit more wisdom in the heart than I realize? Because I really do focus on the brain for the answers, right? It's like I understand the pattern matching. I understand expectations. I've seen thousands of different kind of belief systems and how they work together and what they lead. So it's like I already know the answers from a cerebral perspective, but intuitively I seem to always kind of come to the same place. And so it's really interesting for me to dig into of like how much more wisdom is there in the intuition than I'm willing to admit.
Well, they say that where the heart goes, the body follows, right? And
Right.
if you can keep your mind out of it, you might not either think your way in or to it or think your way out of it, which could create both opportunities and troubles.
Right.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of times I know where I fought change in the past or I needed to do something where I tried to think my way out of it. I tried to
Yeah.
figure a way out of it. I tried to analyze how I could
Right.
do this or when I could do that or if I
Right.
did this or if that deal came through or whatever.
Right.
But at the end of it, it fell back on my heart as to what I felt
Right.
was the right thing to do.
Right.
Some people call that a gut instinct, right? Or
Right.
some sort of
Yeah.
intuition. But
Yeah.
it's always usually revolving around some kind of major change.
Right.
Which
Why?
I understand you know about. You just had a major change, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you?
I sure did. Yeah. I just got married.
Congrats.
Thank
Yeah, he's an
you.
okay guy. We'll let him.
Yeah,
We'll
he's
let
all
him.
right. Yeah, he's a
He's cool.
mixer.
He's all right. All right.
Yeah.
So tell me about this. How did this happen, and how did that change come in?
So we actually met at an event. It was a mindset event for entrepreneurs. I was in work mode, missed every single one of the signs. We were
So heart was not in on that one.
well, not at all. I mean, it was, I was at work. It's like you're so focused, and there was 30 entrepreneurs, and it was on my mind that I was going to try to have a one-on-one with every single one of them during the event. And so John came over to me at some point, and he was like, so I've had like 13 people tell me that I'm supposed to talk to you and that you're going to blow my mind. So I don't know. Here I am. I'm like, great, let's go. And he's like, right now? I'm like, yeah, let's talk. So we went and had a conversation, and it was a great conversation. And then he came back to me toward the end of the event, and he was like, I want to be really, it was really impressive actually. He's like, I want to be really vulnerable with you. Like, you've absolutely like opened my mind. I've never seen my business in this way. And I see the way everyone responded to you. And, you've really shown me
by the
what's
way, I'm in
possible in a
love.
woman. And I was like, that's so great. Go find her. Go find her.
Right.
Just put her in work mode.
He's like, hello.
Right. And it was so funny too when he was like, you've shown me what's possible in a woman. And all I could think of was like, I hope you find her. That's great. Now that you've seen what's possible, go get it. And it wasn't until later when he, reached back out over the phone, and he was like, so, what's the deal? And I was like, oh, you like me. So that was how it started. Yeah.
So that's how your change came about. It was a moment of reconciliation, I guess.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was was really sweet, and then that was that from day one.
That's a cool story.
Yeah.
That is a cool story.
Yeah.
So if I'm in a position of wanting to change something, because I do deal with this a lot with people who reach out and are saying, I want to get into e-commerce, I want to learn how to build a business, I want to change something, I want to get involved, but change is that hard thing, and everyone always thinks it's monetary, but it's not really monetary based at the because change will come at whatever cost we want it to come at, right? Either positive or negative.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who's listening that's right now who's sitting in that space? I call it a post turtle. They're in ambiguous mode. They're just on the fence, and they're like, what do I do? How do I make this change? How would you push them over that? Which direction would you lead them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So number one, 5% of your brain already knows what you want, and 95% of your brain is holding you back, right? So the belief systems that drive your amygdala are typically locked in by 7. So again, go back to your brain power. 95% of your decision-making power is being driven by beliefs that were locked in by a 7-year-old. So if you're feeling stuck or confused on a change, instead of fighting for what you want, ask what your blocks are. Be really, really honest. And in my mind, there's a level of bravery that is required. Be honest about what the blocks are. What are the fears? Because you have them. And pretending that you don't will really wear you out and create a much longer road. And so I think the first thing is just breaking down, not what do I want, but what am I truly afraid of? And when you can start to engage with some of that 95%, you gain your power back. So you can help yourself see that the belief systems that are causing fear are at times a little bit silly, or if they're really deep, right, you can kind of fear set. Okay, so if there's a feeling like, what if I fail? Great. Well, now let's have a conversation about that, right? So start to look at what is that fear of failure? And if I fail, will I lose my business? No. Right? Will I not be able to support my family? No. Like, is the failure just a feeling that I'm afraid of? Or is there something, like you said, a monetary or some sort of a tactical consequence? Very rarely, consequences don't exist in the way that we think they do. As a kid, consequences fall out of the sky. So we learn to be afraid of consequences that aren't real. So we think that cause and effect is consequences, but it's not. Consequences are often made up and are emotional. So when you can get yourself to see that the consequences are emotional, you're able to draw a much more clear picture of the actual trajectory of your decisions. And I think fear starts to subside and the choice becomes quite obvious, right? We very often know what we want to do. It's our fear that prevents us from being able to see clearly.
So what you're saying is I'm a 46-year-old trapped in a 7-year-old mindset.
That is exactly what I'm telling you. Yeah, you and everyone else. Yep.
You and everybody else. Yeah, that fear change is the big one. And I know I reference this a lot as a book, and I probably should get an affiliate link or something for her as much time as I mentioned it. But there's a book I read in the past that helped helped me change my mindset in some difficult times. And it was Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways by Susan Jeffers.
Yeah.
And part of the mantra of that was understanding the fear. And you mentioned it a number of times because I do believe that any change comes on the not being afraid, having courage to overcome the fear.
Right.
And trying to mitigate whatever's on the other side of it by dealing with the outcome, positive or negative, and accepting that change you made, so you are empowered.
Right.
And then the outcome of that change, positive or negative, you will own either way.
Right.
And if you can kind of think yourself through that logic, then the question you ask yourself is, what's the worst that can happen?
Right. Yeah. And
right. What is
important question?
Well, it is an important question, right? Because it could lead to monetary, it could lead to issues, it could lead to a fear of rejection, it could lead to family and friends who are like, I told you so, right? Because they're the first ones to line up with a baseball bat, right? Whenever we go out.
Yeah.
And it could be any one of those things. And I think what you're saying, and I'm understanding, is that we got to identify what those blocks are, those fears, and try to set the obvious ones aside, okay? And try to get into the ones where what is it really? Could it be that spouse that's like, hey, this is the 15th thing you think you're going to try that you told me in the last 90 days, and maybe I just don't trust you're going to do it, and I don't have confidence you're going to get it done.
Right.
Or is it your own insecurities from failures in the past that are restricting you from stepping out again and getting it done? Personally, I failed so many times. I got my successes off of like so many failures.
Right.
Which is something that, I don't have as much problem anymore, failing repeatedly to find the successes, and it holds a lot of people back.
Yeah.
Am I over the target?
So I think that you're on target in a lot of ways. I think one thing I would just add is we think that the thing is scary. The thing is not scary. The beliefs are scary. And the reason why that distinction I think is really important is I think we conflate uncomfortable and afraid. Fear is a very specific trigger in our brain. Fear is a perceived threat to our survival. And failing is not actually a threat to our survival, but our brain doesn't know that. So again, going back to this 0 to 7 age, during our 0 to 7, we are determining what is safe and unsafe, not based off what is actually safe and unsafe, but what makes our family feel harmonious or disharmonious, because our survival doesn't actually depend on ourselves. And so if we have a parent who's stressed or angry or upset, we perceive that actually as dangerous. And so the triggers for what's scary as an adult have nothing to do with what's dangerous or not dangerous. Again, it is literally just reminding our brain of what we decided was safe or unsafe as a 7-year-old. And so when you're thinking about making business decisions, when you're feeling fear, you're actually convinced, right, on some level that there's something dangerous. And I think what can be really helpful is when you see it's not the decision that's scary, it's my feeling that I'm not safe that's scary. And when you can start to separate unsafe and uncomfortable, right, you can start to work through some of that mindset a lot more easily. So I'm not actually unsafe. If I'm feeling fear, I'm not unsafe. I'm just uncomfortable, right? And is being rejected actually unsafe? No, it's unpleasant, but can I handle unpleasant? Yeah, I've been doing unpleasant my whole life. I've dealt with a lot of unpleasant things. And so I think that's a really empowering way to manage your fear, is to appropriately label it and stop calling it fear, start calling it discomfort.
Yeah, discomfort, absolutely. Rejection, right? That's a big one. I mean, you said this a minute ago, and I resonate with the idea that our fear of rejection is more powerful than a lot of the things we perceive as dangers. And so that fear of rejection stops us from getting on stage, from, going out and trying new things or evolving in your life, your business, your work, your family, whatever.
Right.
That rejection is such a powerful both motivator and demotivator.
Yeah, well, we see rejection as unsafe because if we're rejected by our parents and they leave us, we die. And so we categorize rejection in the unsafe bucket. And so I think that's part of why, whether it's me or someone else, seeing a mindset coach is so important, because rejection is not actually scary. And when you can untangle rejection, you're no longer afraid of it. That gives you so much power when you can see that rejection was never unsafe, when you can unlearn the belief systems that create the fear goes away, and you become so much more effective in decision making because you can see clearly without all of that fear and all those old beliefs.
Well, and where do we get some of these fears from? Where you're usually, in some cases, taking someone else's on.
Yeah.
They'll tell you a story. What's the worst that could happen? And it's like, well, I had a cousin, second uncle, third person who got hit by lightning 15 times.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to get hit by lightning 15 times. I'm not going to go outside anymore. It's like you can take on other people's fears. And I don't think we're in like the most dangerous situation we've ever been in. Like if you go back and and something you said a minute ago reminded me of a story somebody told once, and I'll paraphrase very quickly down to, once upon a time we were living in groups and we had to fight for our food, and saber-tooth tigers or whatever else was out roaming around. And so, I mean, if you were outside the herd, if you were rejected from the group and you can no longer sit around the fire, well, most likely you were going to be cannon fodder from some apex predator. Like, so that was real risk. That was real rejection. Like you're outside the group, you're dead.
Right.
And you kind of analogize hey, if you're a 7-year-old and you're not getting fed by your parents, there's a good chance you could die. Life's going to be really difficult for you, right? There's not a lot of things you do. But as adults, we don't have that, do we?
Right.
Like, we could fall to our sofa and Netflix and binge.
Yes.
Which is really, like, pretty safe at the end of the day.
Very safe. Very safe. Yes. Yes.
There's plenty of places for us to be taken care of today that really say, look, you got to step out and try some of these things. You got to get over some of that. You got to get past those rejections, and you got to move on.
Right.
And I hope somebody listening to this today, Britt, is feeling that based on your input, because it's been very good and very valuable today. What else can we leave the people with today that you'd love them to hear from you?
Yeah. I mean, I think the number one thing that I just want to tell everyone is start to explore your mindset. Again, I don't care if it's with me, with someone else, but start to explore your mindset, that you already have asked yourself, what do I want? You already know the information. So just to take a little look internal and start to ask, what are some of my irrational fears? What are some of the fears that aren't serving me? And just start to play with the unsafe versus uncomfortable. I think that can be a really valuable tool. But more than anything, just explore your internal landscape, right? Your subconscious mind is 95% of your decision-making power. And so logic, it isn't working. You've tried it. So try something else. And it's not as scary as it looks, and it's not as hard as it seems. And doesn't need to be hard. It doesn't, right? We have all the entrepreneurs who are like, it has to be hard work. And it doesn't have to. I don't believe in that, right? I love running my business. I think it's a blast. I work very normal hours and it's fun, right? So what if we start to shift and ask, what would it feel like if it was fun? What if exploring mindset was fun and interesting? What if I brought curiosity? What if I brought a little bit of levity, right? That stuff happens for sure, but it's possible to make it fun and exciting and interesting. I mean, we are so driven, and in that drivenness, there's joy. And I think sometimes we bring in this false sense that it has to be hard and serious because I'm an entrepreneur. Like, what if we don't?
Grind.
What if we don't have to do that, right? Yeah.
Well, that's great. Thank you for bringing an encouraging word today. I appreciate you so much. Congrats again on marriage and the move to Utah and everything. And as we catch up again, I'm sure on another episode, I want to hear more about the adventures in Utah.
I would love that. Yeah, but thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. I look forward to more conversations.